The massive tribunal chamber stretched across 3 levels, its crystalline walls pulsing with soft blue light. Representatives from 12 different species sat in curved rows, their diverse forms creating a symphony of colors and textures. At the center, a single chair faced the assembly, occupied by what remained of Commander Velthari. His once proud blue scales were now dulled and scarred, deep gashes running across his muscular frame, where his left eye should have been. A twisted mass of scar tissue told its own story. His remaining eye darted nervously between the tribunal members, never settling on any one face for too long. The air recyclers hummed steadily, mixing atmospheric preferences for the various species. Present. Veltharia's breathing apparatus wheezed with each inhalation, damaged lungs struggling with the station's standard oxygen mix. His hands, once steady enough to pilot a starfighter through asteroid fields, now shook uncontrollably as he reached for the recording device. Counselor the Karan, a towering insectoid from the Vextai Collective, clicked his mandibles impatiently. His compound eyes reflected the chamber's lighting in thousands of tiny fragments. "State your designation for the record." Velthari's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Commander Velthari of the 3rd Assault Fleet, Kethmorian Imperial Navy." Wallowed hard, his throat making a clicking sound. "Serial designation 77 Alpha 9. I was there during the Earth campaign." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Several tribunal members shifted in their seats. The Earth campaign had become legend throughout the galaxy not for its glory, but for its horror. "I witnessed what these humans are capable of," Velthari continued, his voice gaining strength, but losing stability. "I saw things that still wake me screaming in the medical bay." Counselor Bexara, a graceful aquatic being whose translation suit bubbled softly, leaned forward. "The Kethmorian Empire has conquered over 400 worlds in the past millennium. Your species has never retreated from a single engagement." "What made Earth different?" Velthari laughed, but there was no humor in its tone. "The sound of something broken. We thought they were primitive. Our advanced scouts had been observing their world for 2 full cycles. They've reported basic chemical propulsion, crude energy weapons, simple metal alloys. Their largest military conflicts involve throwing metal projectiles at each other." He activated a holographic display with trembling claws. Images of Earth appeared: blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling peacefully around the 3rd planet from their sun. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Velthari's voice carried a bitter edge. "Our intelligence division classified it as a Class 7 conquest, a standard 3 rotation subjugation protocol. We brought 50,000 of our finest warriors, 12 heavy cruisers, and enough firepower to level continents." The display shifted to show massive Kethmorian warships in formation, their dark hulls bristling with weapons arrays. Each vessel was nearly 2 kilometers long, designed to inspire terror in any species that saw them approaching. "Fleet Admiral?" "Zeekmer himself briefed us before departure," Velthari continued, his scarred face twisting with memory. "He said we were going to harvest a garden world. Easy resources, compliant population, minimal resistance expected." Some of the younger warriors were disappointed. They wanted a real fight. Counselor Decoranis' mandibles clicked rhythmically. "Your preliminary assessment indicated a population of approximately 7 billion humans scattered across several continents. Surely the numerical advantage was manageable." 7 billion, Velthari repeated, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We thought that was just a number. We didn't understand what it meant until it was too late." The holographic display showed population density maps of Earth. Bright clusters of light marking major cities and settlements. Red tactical overlays indicated planned assault vectors and occupation zones. "We spent 3 days in orbit, conducting final reconnaissance. The humans showed no signs of panic, no mass evacuations, no desperate attempts to contact other species for help. Our xenopsychologists interpreted this as evidence of their primitive nature, too simple to understand the threat approaching." Them Veltharius remaining, I fixed on a particular tribunal member, Commander Ulanith of the Draknari Republic, whose own species had fallen to Kethmorian expansion decades earlier. "You know what it's like to face our fleet in battle, Ulanith? You've seen what happens when Kethmorian warriors make planetfall?" Your people fought bravely, but you understood the mathematics of defeat. You knew when to surrender to preserve what remained of your civilization. Commander Ulaneth's feathered crest flattened against his skull, but he said nothing. The humans, Velthari continued, apparently never learned that lesson. Or perhaps they learned something else entirely. The chamber fell silent except for the steady hum of life support systems. Every species represented in the tribunal had encountered the Kethmorian Empire at some point in their history. Most had surrendered. Some had been conquered. None had ever forced them to retreat. Only 847 of us returned, Velthari said finally. Out of 50,000, the holographic display flickered to life, showing the curved edge of Earth as seen from orbit. Velthari's scarred hands moved across the control interface, zooming in on a massive metropolitan area sprawling across the eastern coastline of the largest continent. We chose their primary population center for the initial assault, Velthari explained, his voice carrying the weight of terrible memory. 17 million humans lived in that city alone. Our tactical computers calculated it would take 6 hours to secure the area and establish a command base. The image shifted to show sleek Kethmorian dropships breaking through the atmosphere, their hulls glowing orange from re-entry heat. Each vessel carried 200 fully armed warriors, their powered armor gleaming with weapon systems that could level buildings. I was aboard the lead transport in the first wave, Velthari continued, touching the deep scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. Through the observation ports, we could see the city spread out below us, like a circuit board. Millions of lights, thousands of structures, endless streets filled with their primitive vehicles. Counselor Vikaran S. Compound eyes focused intently. On the display, what was the human response to your approach? Nothing, Velthari replied, his voice hollow. Absolutely nothing. No anti-aircraft fire, no defensive shields, no evacuation sirens. Their communication channels carried normal traffic weather reports, entertainment broadcasts, commercial advertisements, as if 1,200 armed dropships weren't descending on their largest city. The hologram zoomed closer, showing individual streets and buildings in perfect detail. Something was wrong with the image. The streets were empty. No vehicles moved along the roadways. No crowds gathered in the public spaces. The city looked like a perfect model with no one living in it. Our pilots reported clear landing zones throughout the urban area, Velthari continued. No resistance, no defensive positions, no sign of military preparation. Fleet Command was ecstatic. They thought the humans had panicked and fled into the wilderness. He manipulated the display to show Kethmorian forces touching down in the city center. Massive warriors in powered armor emerged from their transports, plasma rifles at the ready, scanning for targets that weren't there. The first team secured the landing zones within minutes. No casualties, no contact with enemy forces. We began deploying heavy equipment, walker mechs, artillery platforms, communication arrays, standard occupation protocol. Velthari's remaining eye grew distant, lost in the memory. I remember standing in what they called Times Square, looking up at their primitive electronic displays, still showing advertisements for products no one was there to buy. The silence was absolute. In a city of 17 million, we couldn't find a single living human. The display shifted to show Kethmorian squads moving through empty streets, their sensors sweeping for life signs. The warriors moved with practiced efficiency, but their body language suggested growing unease. That's when we noticed the modifications. Velthari's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Subtle at first. Street layouts that didn't match our orbital reconnaissance. Buildings with new additions that hadn't been there during our surveillance. Construction equipment positioned in ways that made no tactical sense. The hologram zoomed in on specific areas where human infrastructure had been altered. Concrete barriers appeared in strange configurations. Utility lines had been rerouted through unusual paths. Construction scaffolding created maze-like passages. Between buildings, our engineering teams reported that the humans had been busy during our 3-day orbital phase. They had modified their own city, turning familiar streets into something else entirely. but we couldn't understand the purpose. It looked random, chaotic. Valtharius' claws scraped against the metal armrest of his chair. Then the attacks began. The display exploded into chaos. Buildings that had appeared normal suddenly erupted in massive explosions, engulfing entire Kethmorian squads in flames and debris. Streets collapsed into carefully prepared pit traps lined with sharpened metal spikes. What had looked like abandoned construction sites revealed themselves as hidden weapon emplacements. The first explosion took out 12 of my warriors, Valthari continued, his voice shaking. A simple office building, 40 stories tall, packed with explosives from foundation to roof. The blast was so powerful it shattered windows 6 blocks away. The hologram showed the aftermath, a massive crater where the building had stood, surrounded by twisted metal and burning debris. But more disturbing was what came next. As Kethmorian forces rushed to assist their fallen comrades, more buildings began exploding in sequence like a deadly chain reaction. They had turned their entire city into a weapon, Valthari whispered. Every structure, every street, every piece of infrastructure was part of an elaborate trap. We had walked right into the center of it. Counselor Bexara's translation suit bubbled more rapidly, indicating increased stress. But surely your superior firepower gave you an advantage once you understood the threat? Valtharia's laugh was bitter and broken. Superior firepower? Had plasma cannons that could melt through starship hulls. They had chemical explosives made from cleaning supplies and fertilizer. We had powered armor that could stop military-grade weapons. They had metal fragments accelerated by pressure waves. The display showed a group of young humans emerging. From a subway entrance, they looked like children, barely old enough to be considered adults by any civilized species standards. But they moved with purpose, carrying crude devices that sparked and hissed with primitive energy. This female Dayun was 19 cycles old by their measurement. Valthari pointed to a small figure directing the group. She led 7 other younglings in an assault on our heavy walker mechs, machines that cost more than most planets' annual defense budgets. The hologram showed the human children spreading out through the streets, their movements coordinated despite their primitive communication devices. They carried backpacks that seemed too heavy for their small frames, and their faces showed a determination that sent chills through the watching tribunal members. Dune's group used shaped charges made from kitchen chemicals to disable 3 of our walker mechs, Valthari continued. Devices that probably cost them a few dozen credits to manufacture, destroying millions of credits worth of military hardware. The display showed the impossible scene-massive Kethmorian war machines, each one standing for stories tall and bristling with weapons, toppling over as their leg joints were severed by precisely placed explosives. The humans scattered like insects, disappearing into the maze of modified streets before the mechs even hit the ground. But that wasn't the worst part. Valthari's voice grew hollow. The worst part was realizing that the humans hadn't fled at all. They had simply repositioned. 17 million people had moved into positions where they could do the most damage when we arrived. The hologram pulled back to show the full scope of the city. What had appeared empty from orbit was revealed to be a massive trap, with humans hidden in every tunnel, every building, every carefully prepared position. They had turned their home into a weapon, and themselves into its ammunition, we thought. We were invading a city, Valthari whispered. We were actually walking into the largest military installation in their planet's history. The holographic display shifted to show a timeline of the 3rd day of combat. Valthari's remaining eye tracked the data streams flowing across the projection, each one representing another tactical disaster for the Kethmorian forces. We should have recognized the pattern earlier, Valthari said, his voice carrying the weight of hindsight. Every skirmish, every ambush, every engagement was teaching them something new about us. While we were trying to win battles, they were learning how to win the war. The display zoomed in on a burning Kethmorian outpost. These dead warriors lay scattered around the perimeter, their advanced armor cracked and smoking. But what drew attention were the humans moving methodically through the wreckage, examining every piece of technology with intense focus. After our first major engagement, we left behind 17 plasma rifles and 3 suits of powered armor, Valthari continued. Standard protocol assumed primitive species would be unable to operate our equipment. We planned to recover the gear after securing the area. His claws scraped against the control interface, bringing up detailed schematics of Kethmorian weapons. These plasma rifles represent centuries of technological development. The power cells alone require rare isotopes found only in the cores of dying stars. The targeting systems use quantum processors more advanced than most species' entire computer networks. Counselor Ulaneth leaned forward, his feathered crest rising with interest. How long did your analysis suggest it would take for humans to understand this technology? Our Xenotechnology division estimated between 50 and 100 cycles, Velthari replied. Most species require decades just to understand our basic power systems. Some never managed to reverse engineer our weapons at all. The hologram shifted to show a human workshop hidden in the basement of a destroyed building. A male figure worked frantically over a partially disassembled plasma rifle, his hands moving with surprising precision despite the primitive tools surrounding him. This human, Dongwu, was a mechanical engineer in their civilian sector, Velthar explained. He specialized in repairing their ground vehicles. According to our intelligence, he had never seen energy weapons before our invasion. The display showed Dongwu's progress hour by hour. First, he carefully removed the power cell, testing its energy output with crude measuring devices. Then he began mapping the internal circuitry, creating hand-drawn diagrams that covered every surface of his makeshift laboratory. Within 18 hours, he had created a complete schematic of our plasma rifle. Belthari continued, his voice filled with grudging admiration mixed with terror. But he didn't stop there. He began modifying the design. The hologram showed Dongwu working with intense concentration, rewiring components and adding strange additions to the weapon's firing mechanism. His modifications looked crude compared to Kethmorian engineering, but they served a specific purpose. He turned our own weapons into traps, Velthari whispered. When my warriors tried to retrieve their abandoned equipment, the modified rifles exploded on activation. The blast pattern was designed specifically to defeat our armor at close range. The display showed the horrific aftermath. An entire Kethmorian platoon lay motionless, their supposedly impenetrable armor cracked open like eggshells. The explosion had been precisely calculated to exploit the one weakness in their defensive systems. But Dongwu wasn't working alone. Belthari continued, manipulating the display to show a network of underground tunnels connecting dozens of similar workshops. The humans had established a communication system using their primitive electronic networks. Every discovery, every breakthrough, every tactical innovation was shared instantly across their entire planet. The hologram revealed the true scope of human coordination. Thousands of workshops hidden throughout the city, each one focused on understanding and improving captured Kethmorian technology. Engineers, scientists, even children worked together to unlock the secrets of advanced warfare. A female named Yujin managed something even more impressive, Belthari said, his scales darkening with remembered humiliation. She was a communications specialist for their civilian emergency services. Her job involved coordinating their primitive rescue operations during natural disasters. The display showed Yujin working with a captured Kethmorian communication array. The device was the size of a small building, designed to coordinate fleet operations across entire star systems. Its encryption algorithms were considered unbreakable by galactic standards. Within 36 hours, she had cracked our military communication codes, Velthari continued. Not just intercepted them completely, understood them. She began broadcasting false orders to our field commanders using perfect Kethmorian military protocol. The hologram showed the chaos that followed. Kethmorian units received orders to attack positions held by their own forces. Supply convoys were redirected into human ambushes. Reinforcements were sent to empty coordinates, while real battles raged elsewhere. The psychological effect was devastating, Belthari explained. Our warriors began to doubt every order they received. Command structure collapsed as officers questioned whether communications came from legitimate sources or human infiltrators. Counselor Vekarin's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. This level of technological adaptation should be impossible for a pre-warp species. That's what we thought, Belthari replied bitterly. But we were thinking like civilized beings. We assumed they would follow logical development patterns, gradual learning curves, proper testing procedures. The humans threw all of that aside. The display showed human workshops where safety protocols were completely ignored. Engineers worked with dangerous energies using nothing but makeshift protective equipment. Experiments that should have taken months were completed in hours through reckless trial and error. They were willing to sacrifice themselves to gain knowledge, Belthari continued. I watched a human male named Tejo deliberately expose himself to plasma discharge, so his colleagues could study its effects on human physiology. He died slowly and painfully, but his sacrifice allowed them to develop countermeasures that saved thousands of other humans. The hologram showed Tejo in a makeshift medical facility, his body covered in severe burns from plasma exposure. Despite his obvious agony, he continued providing detailed descriptions of his symptoms to human medical teams taking notes. The worst part was their psychological warfare. Belthari's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. They didn't just adapt our technology, they adapted our minds. The display showed captured Kethmorian warriors in human custody. Instead of traditional imprisonment, the humans had created elaborate psychological operations designed to break down their captives' mental conditioning. They studied our honor codes, our cultural taboos, our deepest fears, Belthari continued. Then they weaponized that knowledge against us. They would stage fake surrenders knowing our warrior traditions required us to accept honorable defeat. When we approached to take prisoners, they would detonate hidden explosives. The hologram showed the devastating results. Kethmorian warriors, trained from birth to show mercy to defeated enemies, found themselves trapped by their own moral principles. Every act of honor became a potential death sentence. By the end of the first week, my warriors were paralyzed by paranoia, Belthari concluded. They couldn't trust their equipment, their orders, their senses, or their own principles. The humans had turned everything we believed in against us. The tribunal chamber fell silent as the true scope of human adaptability became clear. Hadn't just fought the Kethmorian Empire, it systematically dismantled everything that made it effective. The holographic display shifted to show a coastal settlement nestled between rolling hills and a gray ocean. Belthari's remaining eye fixed on the image with the intensity of someone reliving their worst nightmare. His scales had turned a deep purple, almost black, signaling extreme psychological distress. The settlement was called Busan, Belthari began, his voice hollow. 300,000 humans lived there before the war. By the time we surrounded it, maybe 8,000 remained. They were trapped between our forces and the sea, with nowhere to run. The display zoomed in to show Kethmorian positions arranged in a perfect siege formation. Heavy plasma artillery pointed down from the surrounding hills, while assault ships blocked any escape routes by water. It looked like a textbook military operation, overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. Fleet Admiral Zekmer himself took command of the siege, Belthari continued. He wanted to make an example of these humans, to show the rest of their species what happened when they resisted the Kethmorian Empire. We had enough firepower to turn the entire settlement into glass. The hologram showed the massive command ship hovering 2 kilometers above the settlement. Its weapons arrays could have eliminated every human in the area within minutes, but something held them back. The Admiral wanted prisoners, Belthari explained. Our intelligence division needed to understand how the humans had adapted so quickly to our technology. They wanted to study living specimens, to learn the source of their impossible ingenuity.
Counselor?
Bexara's translation suit bubbled nervously. A logical approach for dealing with an unknown threat. Logical, Belthari repeated bitterly. Yes, it seemed logical at the time. We had overwhelming superiority in numbers, firepower, and technology. The humans were exhausted, running low on supplies, cut off from reinforcements. Any rational species would have surrendered. The display showed the human settlement in detail. Buildings damaged by weeks of bombardment, streets filled with rubble, defensive positions that looked hastily constructed and barely adequate. everything. Suggested a population on the verge of collapse. That's when their leader requested a parley, Velthari continued. A male named Jinwoo emerged from the settlement carrying a white flag, their traditional symbol of truce. He appeared to be in his 4th decade, wearing simple civilian clothes, completely unarmed. The hologram focused on Jinwoo as he walked slowly across the no-man's land between the human settlement and Kethmorian lines. He moved without fear, his stride confident despite the dozens of plasma rifles trained on him. Admiral Zeekmer was pleased, Velthari said. He believed the humans had finally accepted the inevitable, agreed to meet under traditional combat. Protocol's neutral ground, no weapons, honor guards from both sides. The display showed the meeting point halfway between the opposing forces. A small hill overlooking the settlement, marked with ceremonial banners from both sides. Kethmorian officers in dress uniforms stood at attention, while Ginwoo approached alone. I was part of the Admiral's honor guard, Velthari whispered, touching the scars on his face. I stood 3 meters away when Jinwoo offered surrender. On behalf of his people. The Admiral was gracious in victory, promising fair treatment for civilians who cooperated. The hologram zoomed in on the 2 leaders as they spoke. Ginwoo's expression remained calm, almost serene, as he listened to the Admiral's terms. His hands stayed visible, his posture non-threatening, everything about his demeanor suggesting acceptance of defeat. Then Ginwoo smiled. Veltharia's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. It wasn't the smile of someone accepting mercy, it was the smile of someone who had already won. The display showed Jinwoo's face in perfect detail. Heiheo's smile was gentle, almost sad, but his eyes held a determination that sent chills through the watching tribunal members. He spoke a single word in their language, Velthari continued. Later, we learned it meant, remember. That's all he said, just remember. The hologram expanded to show the entire settlement from above. For a moment, nothing seemed to change. Then, starting from the center and spreading outward like ripples in a pond, every building began to explode simultaneously. The entire settlement had been rigged with explosives, Velthari explained, his voice shaking. Every home, every shelter, every structure that could provide cover for our troops. They had turned their own city into a massive bomb. The display showed the horrific chain reaction as buildings collapsed in perfect sequence.
The explosions
Were timed to create maximum destruction, each detonation triggering the next in a carefully orchestrated symphony of devastation. But they weren't just destroying buildings, Velthari continued. The 8,000 humans still in the settlement, men, women, children, elderly, they were all still inside when the explosions began. The tribunal members sat in stunned silence as the implications became clear. The humans hadn't just sacrificed. Their leader, they had sacrificed their entire population. Ginwoo knew exactly what would happen when he spoke that word, Velthari said. He knew every person in that settlement would die. He knew he would die. But he also knew that our ground forces had moved into position to occupy the city after his surrender. The hologram showed Kethmorian troops advancing into the settlement, confident in their victory. They were spread throughout the area when the explosions began, caught completely off guard by the coordinated destruction. We lost over 3,000 warriors in 30 seconds, Velthari whispered. An entire battalion eliminated by people who chose to destroy themselves rather than accept occupation. But the psychological impact was even more devastating than the physical losses. The hologram showed surviving Kethmorian forces standing in the smoking ruins, their expressions visible even through their helmets. They looked like beings who had witnessed something beyond their comprehension. How do you fight an enemy that considers its own death a victory? Velthari asked, his voice rising with barely contained hysteria. How do you negotiate with beings who will sacrifice everything, including their own children, to hurt you? The display shifted to show 3 small figures moving through the smoke and chaos. Female humans, barely visible against the backdrop of destruction, slipping between the confused Kethmorian forces with impossible stealth. But Jinwoo's sacrifice was just the beginning, Velthari continued. While we were trying to understand what had happened, 3 females used the explosion as cover to infiltrate our command ship. The hologram showed the interior of the massive Kethmorian vessel, Haijin, Saoyang, and Yunji moved through the corridors like ghosts, their knowledge of the ship's layout suggesting weeks of careful planning. Haijin was a computer programmer, Velthari explained. Soyoung was a communications engineer. Yunji was a data analyst. All civilians, all supposedly non-combatants. They had volunteered for a mission they knew was suicide. The display showed the three women working with desperate efficiency in the ship's central computer core. They downloaded terabytes of tactical data, fleet positions, supply schedules, and strategic plans while Kethmorian forces were still dealing with the settlement's destruction. They transmitted everything to human resistance cells across the planet, Velthari said. Our entire invasion strategy, our supply lines, our reinforcement schedules, all of it was in human hands within hours. The hologram showed the three women calmly waiting in the computer core as Kethmorian security forces finally discovered them. They made no attempt to escape or resist, simply sat with their hands visible until the guards arrived. They died with smiles on their faces, Velthari whispered. Even as our security teams executed them, they were smiling, because they knew they had accomplished their mission. The tribunal chamber fell silent, except for the hum of life support systems. The scope of human sacrifice was beyond anything the assembled species had ever encountered. Our warriors began to break down psychologically, Velthari continued. They couldn't understand an enemy that viewed death as just another tactical option. We were fighting beings who had weaponized their own mortality. The display showed Kethmorian soldiers huddled in their ships, refusing to leave the relative safety of their vessels. These were warriors who had conquered hundreds of worlds. But the human approach to warfare had shattered their fundamental understanding of combat. By the fourth week, we had soldiers requiring medical treatment for psychological trauma, Velthari concluded. The humans had turned their entire planet into a weapon designed to destroy our sanity. We weren't just losing the war, we were losing our minds. The holographic display flickered with tactical data that made no sense. Red markers showed destroyed human settlements, but green indicators revealed active resistance operations in the exact same locations. Velthari scarred. Hands trembled as he tried to explain the impossible. On day 43, our orbital scanners confirmed complete destruction of 7 major human population centers, he began, his voice carrying the weight of disbelief. We had used plasma bombardment to turn entire cities into molten glass. Nothing could have survived those temperatures. The display showed satellite images of the devastation. Where sprawling human cities once stood, only smooth craters of fused sand remained.
Ow.
The destruction was absolute, thorough, final. Yet within hours of these bombardments, our supply convoys were being attacked by forces operating from those exact coordinates, Velthari continued. At first, we assumed our sensors were malfunctioning. How could dead cities launch military operations? The hologram shifted to show a complex network of tunnels and chambers stretching deep beneath the surface. The underground system connected multiple cities across thousands of kilometers, creating a hidden world beneath the one the Kethmorians had destroyed. Males like Kyung-Soo and Woo-Jin had spent years preparing for this moment, Velthari explained, highlighting specific areas of the tunnel network. They weren't just resistance fighters, they were architects of humanity's survival. While we were studying their surface cities, they were building an entire civilization underground. The display zoomed into one of the underground facilities. Vast chambers housed manufacturing centers, living spaces, hydroponic farms, and command centers. Thousands of humans moved through the complex with practiced efficiency, as if they had been preparing for underground warfare their entire lives. Kung-Soo was a mining engineer before the invasion, Velthari said, pointing to a figure coordinating evacuation procedures. He had convinced his government to expand their subway systems and underground infrastructure under the pretense of earthquake preparedness. In reality, he was creating fortress networks beneath every major city. The hologram showed the incredible scope of the project. Natural cave systems had been expanded and connected. Underground rivers provided water, and transportation, geothermal vents supplied power. The humans had essentially created a second planet beneath their surface world. But Woo-Jin was even more impressive, Velthari continued, his voice filled with grudging admiration. He was a communications specialist who had convinced the human military to install hardened fiber optic networks throughout their tunnel systems. When we destroyed their surface communications, their underground networks remained completely intact. The display revealed the true horror of human preparation. Every surface facility destroyed by Kethmorian forces had underground counterparts that continued operating. Every eliminated command center had backup facilities deeper in the tunnel networks. The humans had built redundancy into every aspect of their civilization. "We thought we were fighting a planet," Velthari whispered. "We were actually fighting two planets, one visible and expendable, one hidden and essential." But the underground networks were only part of the nightmare. The hologram shifted to show a female figure working frantically at a complex array of electronic equipment. Jihai, a human data analyst, had accomplished something that terrified the watching tribunal members. This female had worked for their global communication networks before the invasion, Velthari explained. She understood how to manipulate electronic signals in ways our own engineers couldn't comprehend. She had done something impossible. She had hacked our quantum-encrypted military communications. The display showed Jihai's makeshift laboratory. Hidden in an underground facility beneath what had once been Seoul, banks of primitive human computers worked, alongside captured Kethmorian technology, creating hybrid systems that shouldn't have been possible. She wasn't just intercepting our communications, Velthari continued, his scales darkening with remembered humiliation. She was analyzing every transmission, every tactical order, every strategic discussion. Then she was broadcasting detailed analyses to every human settlement on the planet. The hologram showed the scope of Jihai's intelligence operation. Real-time tactical data flowed from Kethmorian command ships to human resistance cells across the globe. Fleet movements, supply schedules, attack plans, everything was shared instantly with every human military unit. "The humans were learning our tactics faster than we could develop new ones," Velthari said. Every engagement taught their entire species something new about Kethmorian warfare. They were evolving as a military force in real time. The display showed human forces adapting their strategies with impossible speed. Tactics that worked against them once never worked again. Weapons that proved effective were countered within hours. It was like fighting an enemy that could see the future. But the final horror came when we tried to retreat. Velthari's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. We had lost 60% of our ground forces and half our orbital fleet. Fleet Admiral Zeekmer ordered a complete withdrawal from the system. The hologram showed Kethmorian ships moving into evacuation formations, preparing to abandon the failed invasion. But something was wrong with the tactical display. 3 of their escort vessels were moving in the wrong direction, turning toward the evacuation transports with weapons powered. Males named Sungmin and Jae-ho had led boarding parties onto our ships, Velthari explained, his voice shaking with disbelief. They had somehow infiltrated our most secure vessels and taken control of the bridge systems. The display showed the impossible scene inside one of the captured ships. Human boarding parties, wearing improvised spacesuits made from captured Kethmorian equipment, moved through the corridors with deadly purpose. They had studied Kethmorian ship designs from captured technical manuals and knew exactly where to strike. Songmin was a ship designer for their civilian space program, Velthari continued. Jae-ho was a software engineer who specialized in industrial automation systems. They had no military training, no experience with space combat, but they understood machines, and they learned fast. The hologram showed the captured Kethmorian vessels turning their weapons on the evacuation fleet. Plasma cannons designed to destroy planets were now in human hands, being used with devastating effectiveness against their former owners. "They didn't just capture our ships," Velthari whispered. "They improved them. It's modified our weapons systems, enhanced our targeting computers, optimized our power distribution. Within hours, they were operating our technology better than we were." The tribunal members watched in horror as human-controlled ships systematically disabled Kethmorian evacuation transports. The tables had completely turned. The invaders were now the ones trapped and helpless. The final transmission from Fleet Admiral Zickmeyer was a warning to the entire Kethmorian Empire, Velthari said, his voice hollow with defeat. They fight like demons. They learn like machines. They sacrifice like fanatics. If we do not leave. Now, none of us will leave at all. The hologram showed the chaotic final evacuation. Kethmorian ships fleeing the system in complete disorder, while human-controlled. Vessels pursued them to the edge of the solar system. The proud Third Assault Fleet, conqueror of 400 worlds, was running for their lives from a species they had dismissed as primitive. We didn't lose because the humans were stronger, Velthari concluded, looking directly at each tribunal member. We lost because they were something we had never encountered before, species that treats warfare. As an evolutionary process, every defeat made them stronger. Every victory taught them something new. He stood slowly, his damaged body trembling with exhaustion and trauma. I beg this council to classify Earth as a forbidden world. Build a quarantine barrier. Install automated warning systems. Never, under any circumstances, give humanity a reason to develop interstellar travel. Because if they ever feel threatened enough to take their war to the stars, if they ever decide that their survival requires the destruction of other species, Velthari's voice dropped to a terrified whisper that echoed through the silent chamber. The galaxy will burn, and there won't be anything left to remember that we ever existed. The tribunal voted unanimously. Earth was immediately classified as a Class X restricted world, surrounded by automated warning beacons broadcasting in every known galactic language. Humanity would remain contained not as prisoners, but as a force too dangerous to ever provoke. The Kethmorian Empire, for the first time in its history, had learned the meaning of fear.